There are certain proteins that indicate that there's an inflammation. So proteins like pro-inflammatory cytokines. And so if the levels of these are raised, then that corresponds to inflammation. But the brain functions, it's very chemically complex and dynamic. So the things that happen in the brain between two cells happen, within a second, within the milliseconds. With sort of any health issue, one of the first ports of call is to take a blood sample, which is fine for a lot of sort of diseases of the body. You can tell a lot with taking a blood sample. But because there's something called the blood-brain barrier, it means the levels of things in your blood are not necessarily the levels of the same things in the brain. And on top of it, you've got the sort of dynamic nature of the way that the brain signals. So extracting blood from the body really is not telling you very much at all about the brain. That's why it's important to develop these probes, because you sort of have to find a way to develop sort of this separated system, if you like, developing the tools, getting them smaller, faster, more reproducible is really the first step towards being able to say stuff about health issues in humans. We discovered that inflammation has an effect on the brain. And the effect that we first measured was that it would, if you sort of are experiencing an inflammation, the serotonin levels in the brain are affected. In fact, they go down. And people had for a long time sort of associated decreased serotonin levels with depression. But then we asked why. We focused in on another messenger, histamine, a very strong messenger of inflammation in the body. People know that you can measure it. But we also know there's histamine in the brain. We just know much less about it in the brain. We don't know what it's doing. And the reason we sort of became interested in histamine is because it's important in inflammation in the body, but also the serotonin neurons that are in the brain have histamine receptors on them, and these histamine receptors are inhibitory. We made new technology to measure histamine in the brain, and we defined it, and characterized it in great detail about how it's controlled, how it's released, how it's reuptaken. And then we induced inflammation, and we watched that sort of co-modulation of serotonin and histamine, and it's absolutely fascinating. As we hypothesized, during an inflammation, the histamine levels in the brain go up, and they force the serotonin down. And by rather than targeting serotonin pharmacologically, we've been targeting histamine pharmacologically, and we actually have had much better luck at getting the serotonin levels back to normal by looking at histamine rather than looking at serotonin. One place that I think I would love to put my probes, I'd love to start putting them in the gut and to sort of probe that gut-brain connection. Most people have very strong digestive or stomach reactions to bad news, right? Often people feel sick, or they feel like they need to go to the bathroom, or we call it a gut reaction, right? And there's a reason for that. There's a nerve that connects the brain and the gut, and people think that it's serotonergic in nature. And I think it'd be fascinating to study that connection. My 5-10-year plan is to start really sort of pushing ahead with chemical diagnostics for depression. We need a good, robust way to diagnose depression. We need a good, robust way to screen new drugs. And we need a good, robust way to sort of treat people on a personal, individualistic level. We'll learn a lot along the way as well. We'll learn about the brain, we'll learn about the immune system, and have a lot of fun, I hope. Pittcon is a brilliant forum. It's our favorite conference. I take my whole lab every year. So many different types of people go there with different interests in the brain and analytical chemistry, and because we sort of bridge those disciplines, we get to sort of interact with the key players in those two fields. But it's also great to sort of be there and see what's on the cutting edge of analytical chemistry, and see what people are doing in the brain with different techniques. The industrial sort of component to it is really neat as well, because we can talk to people in industry. We have several links now because of Pittcon, and long-standing relationships that I wouldn't have. There's no other way I would have sort of come across those people, I think.